This is Chill Bill coming at you live from K-Troll, here to introduce another exciting episode of Skylanders Portalcasters, the podcast discussing anything and everything Skylanders. Over to you.
Thanks again to our resident DJ, Chill Bill, for the stellar introduction. And welcome everyone who's listening to another exciting episode of Portalcasters, where I, Trioxen, and my fabulous co-host GFDitto are joined by our wonderful returning guest star, the character and toy director from the Toys for Bob team, I-Wei Huang, to celebrate one of the most, if not the most important day in Skylanders history, the anniversary of the release of Skylanders Spyro's Adventure, the game that started it all for Portal Masters everywhere. I-Wei previously joined Ditto and Inklander on the show last year to celebrate Skylanders' 10th anniversary by discussing behind-the-scenes details of the art and design of the franchise. Now, for Skylanders' 11th anniversary, Ditto, I-Wei, and I will be discussing the ginormous sequel that is Skylanders Giants, which is celebrating its 10th birthday on October 17th this year. To start things off, welcome back to the show, I-Wei. It's a pleasure to have you back.
Thanks for having me. It's been great. Thanks.
Yeah. So how have you been since your last appearance here on the show?
It's been good. Life these days is pretty interesting, but we're doing good. How have you guys been?
Oh, probably about the same. It's been like a roller coaster ride, and it feels like it's 2 years flies way too fast these days.
Yeah.
It honestly doesn't feel like a whole year has gone by since we last sat down and chatted. Life has been busy and it's been wonderful.
Good to hear that.
I actually had a lot of takeaway from our last conversation, and I left it feeling really inspired, and it's a pleasure to have you back as such.
Oh, thank you. It's always great that you guys are keeping this alive. So it's a great honor, and I'm happy to hear you guys are still going at it.
Well,
Yeah.
it's something we truly enjoyed, so.
Yeah, the passion for Skylanders is it's thriving still.
That's great to hear.
I guess let's begin with our first topic. One of the things that's been on my mind, thinking about Skylanders Giants and its upcoming 10th birthday, is that Skylanders Giants brought us 16 new characters, 8 of which were Giants and 8 of which were cores. Do you have any fun little tidbits on any of the new characters for these games that most people wouldn't know?
Oh boy. Well, I'm not sure what you guys don't know. He seems to know everything. So Giants was an interesting project. It was a very short project, meaning because we were piggybacking, with VV on the studios. Our usual development cycle is 2 years. On the first one, it was a little bit over 2 years, and in Giants, we basically had to do the game in 1 year. So it was super rushed. It was super just cramming everything in, trying to figure out what a sequel means in Skylanders, and then on top of it, having to do all the toy parts. So everything was definitely rushed. Making toys, it was a big learning curve, and it takes time. Things get manufactured and having to be shipped, and so everything just takes time. It's different than just normal game development. So that 1 year was basically a crunch all the way through. Let's see. Well, Crusher was originally an ice character. He was originally going to be a water character, and he was kind of added, one of the last characters to be added, and we need an Earth character. So I just kind of was looking through my old concept art to try to see which one might fit in, and I just decided to change him into a Earth character. So that's one thing.
Which was your favorite, not necessarily Giant, but character you designed for the Giants game?
Oh, that's interesting.
I do recall you telling us before that you did have a soft spot for Ninjini.
Yeah, I think Ninjini was definitely. I think I've said this before, that the idea of her owning her own bottle, as a genie, was really interesting to me. Yeah. So as far as the cores, it's hard to pick, but I think one of the best performing. One of the best sold, Skylanders was Flashwing actually, and that was a really great discovery. Of course, it happened. We found out after the game shipped and everything, right? But the idea of making a crystal dragon, because all the characters are like, most of them are pretty aggressive, with giant weapons and very very mean this and that. So having a character that felt capable but yet kind of has a softer tone to her, it was cool. Didn't really know if it was going to work out, and luckily it did. So
Yeah, Flashwing is definitely a favorite of mine, and just the silhouette of her and just how she stands out amongst the rest. And I'm partial to the Earth element mostly because of Prison Break and just having the
yeah.
kind of gem design. I don't know, she's very striking, so it makes sense
Yeah,
that she.
thanks. Because I always think of the toy side first, when designing one of these guys. And one of the things I often go to with Earth element is crystals, right? Because it shows off well in the toy form. So having transparent plastic that reads as crystals was cool. And yeah, definitely after Prison Break, yeah, just like we just got to do crystals. Just like clear. Try to figure out different ways to do clear plastic and different ways of painting. And she actually has a kind of a pearl. So there's different types of paint, right? There's normal paint, which kind of just looks glossy, plasticky, and you can make it matte. There's also metallic paint, has metallic flakes in it, and then there's pearlized paint, and so she has that. And so I think that was the first time we used pearlized, if I remember correctly. Yeah, we worked out great. We were getting trying a bunch of samples and different types of paint, and of course everything costs money. Certain types of paint cost more than others, so we have to be careful where we spend it and everything. But yeah, she turned out great. I was really pleased with that one.
You mentioned that for Crusher that he was originally planned or was originally going to be an ice Skylander, and you pulled that from your older concept art. Is that correct?
Yeah.
So I was just curious, like how much of like these new characters were pulled from older designs that you may have done, or how many were newer designs?
Yeah, when I say old, it doesn't mean that that it wasn't started back in Spyro's adventure kind of thing. It was started in Giants. I just randomly sketch a whole bunch of different ideas, right? And so when I got to that character, it was actually the CEO of Activision, Eric, at the time, was looking at a whole bunch of my like really rough stuff, and he was pointing out, he's like, that guy's cool, and he picked out Crusher. It was like, well, we already have a water character, so we're trying to figure out different ways, and it's like, well, how about we just make it just make it Earth, right? Just make them all rock. So it wasn't, when I say pulling from old concept, it was an old rejected concept. It was just like a vast, a whole bunch of papers on a desk that we spread out, and looking at any old chicken scratch and go and just trying to figure out, like, okay, should we go in this direction? Should we try that guy? Should we finalize this and that? So that's why I mean by old. A lot of times I have a idea of a character, and I kind of do a whole bunch of sketches to get to the final form, and that could be like a lot of work, a lot of drawings just to get to that stage. But more often than not, there's a whole bunch of sketches just goes nowhere. Just like I just kind of gave up, didn't know what to do with it, and then discover something else that was more interesting, and just kind of So there's a lot of ideas that just never went anywhere.
I am curious in regards to exactly that. Are there any characters or any character designs that you ended up scrapping that you didn't necessarily want to, that you wanted to see make it into the game?
Oh yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot. So I did have gatekeepers. There's execs and my boss and people above me that have opinions, and sometimes it's different than mine. Luckily, for the most part, it's really smooth sailing and it's very aligned. People seem to all like certain characters, but there's definitely times where it's just like, nope, don't like that. Doesn't feel like a Skylander or whatever for whatever reason. There was an elephant character that I really liked that never made it. There was a kind of a mummy vampire slayer kind of a character that I actually really liked. That had a crossbow kind of thing. I remember. So there's a robot character that I really liked. So there's a lot of ones I've tried and really grown attached to it, and for one reason or another just didn't make it, didn't end up getting to be a real character. So there's tons of those.
Yeah, I personally would have loved to see the Mummy Vampire Slayer because that sounds 100% right up my alley.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember what he looked like. He had a kind of a cowboy hat, kind of just I guess what you would think of a vampire slayer kind of trench coat kind of thing, and had but he was a mummy for whatever reason. I think he had one eye that showed through or something. Anyway, there's a lot of drawings and a lot of designs, and a lot of times things evolve, right? Like there's a certain character that didn't quite work, but I'd end up using parts of it, or that character's weapon or that character's backpack or whatever it is on a design that actually did make it and that kind of thing.
That makes a lot of sense, actually.
Yeah, it's really cool that you can have so many designs and they may not work now, but you can breathe new life into them later on with maybe just a switch of like a certain concept, or it's just not their time yet.
Yeah, so I do remember I did go through, because I just would draw all day kind of thing, and then a lot of times I would look back at some old drawings that were horribly drawn, but there's some good ideas that would like, oh, that's a clever thing for a whatever, a gun holster or whatever, right? Like just a little gem of a idea that felt different and cool. Like I would just take that and run with it. So I do, I do go back to my older drawings quite a bit.
Now, you mentioned thinking about how some people would like this Skylander better, some people would like this Skylander better. Some of the new characters introduced in Giants, such as Pop Fizz and Jetvac, they quickly became more iconic and more beloved to a majority of the fans than even the majority of the Spyro's Adventure characters.
Yeah.
Uh, did you foresee that when you finalized their designs? Like, did you anticipate them becoming some of the most iconic?
No, it's always kind of a surprise, sometimes I guess right, sometimes I don't. I always, try to do my best with each character, right? But you just never know which one resonates with the community, right? With the fan base. Definitely, some of the choices are a little bit easier in that if the characters in the starter pack, that's kind of guaranteed to be popular, right? Because everyone has it. But outside of that, it's actually really hard to parse through the data. We do get data of like sales and stuff, right? But you have to remember some characters come out in a later wave. So like, a big part of the franchise, the fan base already moved on, they're not interested anymore, or it comes in the, 3-pack or something. So the data doesn't always tell you the truth because it's really hard to kind of figure out, right? Like, because the ones in the beginning, the first wave definitely perform better than the last wave, but you don't know if that's because they're better characters or better looking characters or better toys or better gameplay characters, or just they're just first, right? When everything's fresh and new and everyone's going on to buy them. So it's hard to figure out, but yeah, it's always a kind of a surprise for me. Pop Fizz, it was interesting because like it was a cool character, but the catch is the Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing, right? And that's like you can't really show that in the toy. Like we try to make the potions and stuff, but like you don't really get to know what he is until you be exposed to the digital side, right? The game side. And we couldn't really make two characters, and it would be confusing, as a toy kind of thing. So
Right, right. And what you've explained there with like the which characters might be better, which characters didn't do so well because they came out later. That feels kind of like what happened to Sunburn, who
Mhm.
came out in a 3-pack, and
Yeah,
so late in the waves that Giants was already on its way out pretty much when it released. So it
right.
didn't do very well overall because at that point in time, Spyro's Adventure was pretty much done to all the fans and they were all gearing up for Giants already.
Exactly. Yeah. So
And
the
then,
poor characters in the later waves always kind of suffer.
right.
Some of the really great characters I thought would have done better if they were released in the first wave. But
And then I've also noticed that there are some characters that you designed with really, really unique and creative designs, but they get kneecapped by the move set or something else from somewhere else in the production line. Like, for example, Shroom Boom, who is a really unique, really creative design. I loved it. It's a mushroom with a slingshot. And then you get around to seeing what he can do in the game, and
yeah,
he just gets tossed to the side and never put in the portal again.
yeah. Speaking of Shroom Boom, here's something that you might be interested in to know. Shroom Boom was a very difficult character to pose. I pose all the characters, right? Like, so I used the game rig and in the low res, and I pose different poses that it has to fit in the blister pack, right? So there's like a dimensional thing, so I can't just do any pose I want, right? And then there's also constraints on, usually you don't want character on one leg, kind of thing, because there's like a structural thing, right? So anyway, with Shroom Boom, and we had had a couple of 3D printers, right? So we can make them and print it out and see. So with Shroom Boom, the tricky thing is he's got basically a giant hat. He's got one eyeball. So, you always want to see the face, right? That's the focus. So he's got a giant hat that likes to cover up the eyeball. And then he's got a slingshot, and the only way you can do the slingshot pose is it covers the eye, right? So it's really hard to make a pose that's cool, but you can see the character, right? You can actually see his face because almost everything covers up his body. So I remember just struggling and trying a whole bunch of different poses and try to make the toy read well. Because one of the cool thing about the toy is that if you notice, if you put the toy on a desk, they're looking at you. They're all looking up. For the most part, they're like designed that way, right? Like make eye contact, right? So, so it kind of hopefully invites you to pick them up, right? So with Shroom Boom, I thought perfect. He's a giant eyeball. He's looking right at you, but it was really hard to angle him in the right way, and with the weapon just kind of gets in the way of everything. So that was a challenge.
Now, you mentioned that you did all of the posing. Giants also featured 24 returning characters from the previous game as reposes or Series 2. How involved were you in the redesigning of the toy for that repose, trying to fit it in the blister pack and whatnot?
Yeah, I was completely involved in that. I did not like doing reposes. I did not like. I mean, I love that the fan base love their beloved characters. They want another version of it, right? So, but the hard thing is like you can't just really put it in another pose because it's really hard to tell that it's a different toy than the last year's toy, right? So you kind of want something special. So we can add things in the game, right, that makes them different and a little bit special. But then in the toy, we were constantly getting pushed to like make it so that they have some attachment or something about them that looks different, that like screams out, "Oh, that's the new version, not last year's." And that was very difficult, especially by the time you get repos 3 times, 4 times. Like it's really hard to come up with yet another, more extreme version of it. And it got really, really difficult. I definitely did not enjoy the reposing aspect of it. It was a very hard challenge, and sometimes we have to add things to the character that I didn't felt like it was a good like visual design, but we needed some visual cue to really tell you, that's different.
Does any particular Skylander stand out as being incredibly difficult to make reposes for?
Yeah, trigger happy.
Oh, that was fast.
So it's the easy one because like you think of like, okay, trigger happy. He's got these big, golden point shooting guns in the original, and then it's like, oh, okay, we're gonna make it bigger, you know, big gun and this and that. And then just like, what do you do after that? Like, there's not much. We put him on a big bomb and like like I wanted to put him on a giant, like, what you call it, like a ship, like with giant guns on it or something, right? Like really elaborate, but like, of course, it doesn't fit in the blister pack. But like after a few times of trying to figure out what the next thing is, just like it's quickly, he has nothing to work with, right? Like, there's on his body you can't redo, so it's all about the weapons, and you just make the weapon bigger and bigger, more extreme, and it just gets too hard.
Yeah, no,
I can imagine. Like, it's pretty rough. Characters like Trigger Happy, Stealth Elf, and Gilgrunt really got a lot of poses.
They did, yeah.
Yeah, and even thinking of characters like Prism Break, where he doesn't really have weapon, outside of his built-in crystal arms. Like, so you had to add, a crystal eruption at the base, and then, his
Yeah.
armor on the back. It just seems like it'd be harder to draw ideas for a character who's lacking certain attachments.
Yeah, and you have to keep in mind too that there's a budget kind of thing, right? Each character has a certain budget, and the more that you add on, the more paint jobs you need. Which all more parts, more paint, more assembly, like everything adds up, and you still have to, keep it within budget, and so like it's this big balancing act that was much harder than you think it would be to come up with stuff like this, with reposes. That was one part of the job that I wish I didn't have to do. I would have rather spend that time making more characters and making better, characters. But at the same time, I understand, the fan base does want them.
Are there any characters that got scrapped due to either like time restraints or, as you just mentioned, budget restraints?
Usually not budget restraints, because by the time we got to the point where we're worrying about budget, we have already made the prototypes and so it's more of that at that time. Then you have to just cut something. You have to change a character. So the easiest way to do that is just kind of getting rid of paint ops, the amount of paint operations, right, per character. So you start cutting and you start removing and trying to figure out, well, maybe I would just paint the whole thing, the whole chest just silver instead of silver with inlay, with trim that's gold or whatever. We just, start simplifying it basically. So they don't get cut because it would be too late to cut, because gameplay is already in production, and characters already made and in prototypes. So it's not that we can replace it with another character quickly by that point. But yeah, there's definitely characters that have been cut altogether, but they usually happen earlier on, right, before we go into full production on the character. So sometimes we do get to as far as the characters modeled and in game, and then just for different reasons we just can't go on, and so they get cut, and someone, another character gets replaced, takes its place, and I kind of have to rush that through. So most of the time it's legal reasons. Just FYI, like Zap was replacing a character that was the legal team felt too close to some other franchise. So we changed it so many times that by the time it was, we just scrapped it, and then but we kept the gameplay exactly the same. So it turned out to be Zap.
Okay.
So you went into sort of giving us a little insight into some of the challenges of creating a character, but now for Giants, now that there's a new variant type of Skylander in your design process, what were some challenges or factors that affected the process when you're determining whether a character would be a giant or just remain a core Skylander?
Giants, I mean, it's usually pretty clear cut. Giants are giants, core is core, and they have different proportions, right? They're usually less cute, right? And they need to feel big. The challenge, I think, for us, like I said before, it was time, right? We had half the production time that we usually get to make these, and we had to try to figure out what a giant is, so 3D printing out a whole bunch of sizes, 5% increments, and trying to figure out, okay, what feels good to be a big character. And then quickly realize that, the bigger the character, the more detail you need. Luckily, we have a bigger budget, right? Because they just cost more. But yeah, I quickly realized that we need so much little details, and they need to have really great paint ops, a lot of paint, in order to make them feel cool and not like a cheap Happy Meal toy. Like a toy without any paint on it, right? Like just kind of looks like a Happy Meal toy. It just looks cheap, and the more paint you can throw at it, the better it gets. But we definitely over detailed the sculpt of the toy as well, making everything, all the details really deep, deeper than you think you need, right? Like if there's like a leather grain or something, it's like in real life, that would be really deep cut, right? So and oversized so that it looks cool as a toy. So I guess that was one of the challenges, was just trying to figure out what exactly is a giant, how do we make the toys. And they also, I think you guys interviewed Robert Leyland before. He came up with the light core technology, and so we're just like, okay, how do we put that into all these toys? Because that's another big pain to deal with, right? Like we have all these visions of, oh, we're gonna light up the eyes, we're gonna light up this part and that part, but then when we actually do the prototype and actually get the samples, it doesn't look right. One of the biggest challenges is like, we want to light up eyes, but eyes are so difficult to light up because we can only afford a certain number of lights, right? LEDs. And so with some characters we have to pipe the light into two different eyes from one light source, and it doesn't glow as well as we wanted to, because Robert and I would prototype things with two lights, one each eye, but we couldn't afford to do that. If we did that, then there's no paint job for their body and it just looks bad. So like there's like this big balancing act. And with some characters that do have eyes that lit up, we tried making the head clear and so the eyes could light up, but then we had to paint the face twice, like two ops instead of one, because the light was shining through the skin, right? Like it was, the light was too bright and the skin was not opaque enough, the paint, so we had to paint it twice, stuff like that I have forgotten about until just now talking to you guys. But there was definitely a learning curve, and there was a lot of issues with Giant, and also coming out with a cool pose that fit in the box, because you wanted the characters to be as big as possible, right? As massive as possible, but it has to fit in that stupid box. So we can't, pose them as much as I'd like them.
Yeah.
Am I hearing a little animosity towards the blister pack there?
Oh yeah, it's always. I mean, blister pack is just. It's always such a pain.
It's the enemy.
It's one of many enemies, but it's one of the big enemies because it's always a big constraint on the toys, on how cool the toys could be. If we just gain like 2 centimeters, wider, like that would have been a lot better. But unfortunately, with the blister pack, it's like they have to. We think in terms of container ships, one of those big container ships that the container, fits so many toys. So if you go over by, just a couple of centimeters, now it doesn't, like we just lost a row of toys that would fit in that container, right? So it all adds into cost at some point. So like everything designed perfectly to fit, on the shelves perfectly and on container ships and everything and boxed up. So like, every year I ask for like, can we just get a little bigger box? And every year it's like, nope, it has to be this size and that size. And yeah, it's difficult.
It was all very carefully crafted and calculated.
It is, because everything costs a lot of money, right? Like it runs just a little bit times, however many toys we sold, it ends up being a lot.
Now, you brought up the light core functionality being implemented in the Giants.
Yeah,
The reposing for the light core characters, I'm assuming you worked on their reposes as well.
yeah.
But the selection of which characters received a light core model, was that also done by sales numbers?
I guess it's a little bit combination. So there's definitely, we know, from marketing that they want these characters because these are the popular characters. Of course, repost these, and sometimes we will try to veto because like there's nowhere to light up this character, or it doesn't work well or it does cost too much. And other times, we could suggest the characters like, look, that character light up really great. We should do that one. There's a really great area, to light up, or a really great pose we can think of. So stuff like that. So I think it's a little bit combination, but for the most part, I don't really get involved in that much of it. I think it's more just I get a list of like, okay, these are the reposes, and sometimes I could suggest something, but mostly it's more that I get handed a bunch of work. It's like repose all these characters.
So for reposes, it was more you get handed an assignment and told to make it happen, and
Right.
less of a selection.
Right. I think I have a little bit of say, but it's more of just a mountain of work that I have to figure out. As you can tell by my tone and what I've talked about before, I'm more interested in spending my time making new characters, right? Because it's more exciting and more interesting for me than to figure out old characters and figure out new ways to sell them or to make them cooler.
Right. It sounds like a better use of your creative muscles to kind of design something new rather than to finagle the old.
Well, it's my interest. I'm not sure if it's a better use of my muscles or time, but I definitely rather come up with new characters always than work on old characters.
Now, there's one thing the fans have been asking for actually quite some time now, since Trap Team came out. And that is that Spyro's Adventure actually mentions giant Skylanders of the light and dark elements. Were
Mhm.
there ever any designs or plans for designs for those particular giants?
No, I don't think so. I mean, we talked about light and dark elements for a long time before introducing them, but I think there was a lot of, I think mostly gameplay reasons, game balance and stuff that really prevented us from really going through with it. But no, so Giants were made during Giants and then was never revisited. And at the time of Giants, when I was designing those, I was not tasked to like, oh, we need light and dark versions of these. It was just more of talked about. Oh, what about introducing new elements? But I definitely didn't draw design characters for Giants.
And then when Trap Team later happened and Light and Dark were introduced, there was no thoughts of retroactively creating giants for those elements?
Not that I can remember, no, because we weren't making Giants toys. Even though the Trap Master characters were kind of big, they were kind of in between, right? Giants, like size wise, but no, I don't recall ever revisiting Giants, giant characters again after Giants.
Okay. Yeah, that's something that the fans have been wondering since the release of Trap Team because it was mentioned in Spyro's Adventure. So
Yeah.
it's really nice to have some clarification on that topic.
Yeah, I mean, you guys know the lore and all the details way more than anyone else. I feel like on my side, I have my blinders on. I have my little box. I do my thing, and you guys are in tune with stuff that I know nothing about. I didn't know what you just said, in Spiral's Adventure that they were mentioned, and like stuff like that. It's like, no, I'm just designing these cool characters, and then other teams will take the gameplay or the story or whatever. I'm just purely working on design of characters, the way they look, and the toys. That's really it.
Right.
So there wasn't really, you didn't have any influence for lore or story wise of how a character was, what their personality was, or how they'd behave. It'd be more you try and convey it through the character's appearance.
That's correct. And on top of that, I don't even convey the gameplay or animation or the power ups or whatever. I'm just really just all I do is draw, make sure the toys look great, and that's really it. I actually really enjoy that process. I think I might have said this before, but I really enjoy that process of someone else. I mean, we had a great team. That's number one, right? Like full trust in the team. So it's great to have your chunk of the work, your baby, kind of just go, hey, you guys figure out the rest. I got to go design a new character, and then months later, seeing the character like in game and hearing about the story is like, oh, I never thought this character is this kind of personality or that kind of gameplay, or and just like I'm discovering it for the first time, like you guys are playing it for the first time, and it's great. It's really exciting, and the team's always been just a great surprise. It's always like a positive experience, right?
Yeah, no, that sounds like honestly, a work experience, just having that collaborative environment and being able to take a design that you put a lot of love and effort into, and then seeing how another person or a team of people interprets that and turns it into something more.
Yeah, and the poor designer, like I was saying before, like by the time they get the character, it's already prototyped, 3D printed and modeled and animated, and designers will come up to me. It's like, what do you see in this character? What does he do with this spear or with that gun or with this? What does that backpack thing do? And I was like, I don't know. You guys figure it out. Just surprise me. Come up with something cool, and they always do. So I tried not to interject my. It's not that I don't have feelings and opinions and ideas, but I think they have better ideas, and I don't want to kind of tint it, right? Like just let them be creative.
Giants introduced 3 new female core Skylanders and 1 female giant. And from the 10th anniversary interviews, we kind of know there was some, why female characters weren't more prevalent in the franchise. But do you know of any certain circumstances that caused there to be only 1 female giant out of 8? And were there any other female character designs you wanted to bring to life in this game?
I know that there was definitely some pushback. So to be fair, the majority of our fan base were young boys, right? Like, and there was a argument of boys by boy characters, and luckily we proved that wrong. But there was still data that that showed like yeah, some of the best characters are female characters, and some of the best but that doesn't mean the male characters don't perform well, right? Like, so it's more of what's the best, coolest character, When it came to Giants, I think, I think the gender thing, a lot of times it's like it's not really as thought out as you guys think it might be. It's like we didn't have a percentage to hit, right? It's just like, oh, I've drawn a lot of male characters. How about do a female one, and that kind of thing. And we picked the best character that felt like it fit, the role and what we needed. But with Ninjini being the only one, I'm not sure if that. I don't think that was a conscious choice. But definitely, when you have to make a giant character, it's just a little bit easier, I think, to make like brute force, like chunky, huge, like smashing kind of a character. And so Ninjini was like a more a badass, fast, kind of character. So like she could have been easily been a core, right? But I don't know, for whatever reason, I just decided that she would look really cool as a giant. So no, I don't think it was as well thought out as you guys think it is. We just try to add some female characters when it felt like we need, like there's just too many male characters. But a lot of characters are pretty gender neutral, and it's only what you put into it. Like the non-human characters, right? Like some of the more kind of creatures. Like who knows if they're male or female? And it's like it's a dragon, or it's some weird monster. But I think when it's not clear, then you just assign male to it by default, and maybe that's it. But I don't know. I just create monsters, cool characters. I don't really think that much about the balance of male to female. The only thing I strongly believe in is that no, that's BS. That boys only buy boy characters. You just gotta give them cool female characters. That's the only thing that I kind of hold on to.
Right. So it sounds like you basically just designed the best characters you could come up with, and you chose the coolest ones for the job, especially for the title of Giant. What seems to be the case, especially when it comes to characters like Bouncer, who are a robot, they're not human. Therefore, just by looks alone, you wouldn't be able to perceive that. It's when they later go and add the personality and the voice to it that
Right.
it becomes a little more, or it seems like it becomes a little more one-sided at that point, even if the design itself maybe wasn't gendered to begin with.
That's
Um,
true. But even as like Pop Fizz, like Prison Break, like they're just kind of creatures, right? Like who knows if
correct.
they're male or female? But yeah, as soon as you add personality and voice and but I think most people just assume that they're male.
Now, speaking of the designing of creatures and stuff, you shared with us before that a lot of your inspiration for character designs come from nature, from Dr. Slump, and from the works of Miyazaki.
Yeah.
With a title like Giants, was there ever any other outside influence, such as kaiju, that helped guide your work?
No, I mean, I think kaiju is, I wouldn't say that has a direct influence, but definitely when we were on the animation team, they were really trying to figure out like how do you make a character feel giant, right? It's not just scaling the character up; it's their movements, right, and what they do. And we had all these like what did we call it, feat of strength or something, right? Like different ways to kind of show like, hey, look how much bigger this character is. A little guy can't do this kind of thing, right? So there's definitely a lot of tests to do that. As far as inspiration, I think maybe indirectly, kaiju just because they're big, but I don't think I have anything to kind of draw from. I was just literally just thinking, okay, if you scale one of these guys up to be really big, what would they look like? You can't just scale them up, right? It wouldn't look right. So like trying to figure out proportions and stuff, and just trying to, I grew up on old school anime like robots, mechs, right? So that was the norm. The whole kaiju fighting robot kind of deal was the norm. So I kind of wanted that like chunky feel, but I don't think that was directly tied to it, tied to the inspiration part of it.
Were there any goals you had as an artist that you were able to achieve with the Skylanders Giants? Such as, like, were there any specific designs you had been wanting to include in the game and were finally able to do so?
No, I think just in general, just having giant characters was an interesting challenge. Like I mentioned, and like I said, I think Linjini is a really great character that I really liked. I think Eyebrow felt very different, and that was kind of to me a bit of a turning point of like, why don't I just throw in this like really bizarre thing and see how it does? A giant eyeball kind of a thing. It's very very Dr. Slump actually. Just trying to figure out if that works. But no, I don't. I think what's that character called? The character with sorry, I don't remember the names of characters, right? Because we have internal names, and
Mhm.
the character that rides the bone bird.
Oh, Fright
That would be
Rider.
Fright Rider.
Fright Rider. Yeah, so Fright Rider is directly inspired by Nausicaa from Miyazaki and Valley of the Wind right here. And I didn't think that people knew it well. And one of the companies that we work with a toy production prototyping company, one of the guys came up to me after, when we were working on it, and it's like, "You got this from Nausicaa, right?" It's like, "Yeah, of course." So at least one person noticed the similarities, but I mean the only similarity is the giant bird, proportion of the bird and the rider. But so there's always stuff like that I feel like that I was able to accomplish and fulfill. It's something I love, turning and twisting into something that I think the audience would like.
Oh, that's fantastic that you're able to throw in something that's sort of basically a reference, and even just one person catching it and being like, "Hey," and you kind of come together and have like a little moment. So that's pretty incredible.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's one of those things that I think all artists, or at least every artist I've been friends with and talked to in a deep art level, we all always feel like we're frauds, right? Like we're all influenced by things that we grew up with or things that we like, and it kind of seeps into your work, right? So when you create a character, you know where all the different influences came from, right? Like this part came from that franchise, this part came from that character, this part came from this creature, this insect, um, whatever it is, like you kind of know, but it's in the package that someone isn't you is going to look at it and feel like, oh, that's new, that's fresh, that's cool. But but the people that are really into some of these franchises or whatever it is that I kind of pull influence from, if they notice it, it's usually a really positive thing. It's because they love it too, right? So that's one example of, yeah, artists we all have imposter syndrome. Always feel like someday someone's going to figure out all this stuff. But what you do as an artist is just like you take all the things you love, you combine it together, and hopefully try to make it all work together in the package that felt new, that felt a little bit different, right? But familiar. That's all we do.
Yeah. Well, I would like you to know that if you ever felt imposter syndrome over, this game and this franchise, there's millions of fans and people collecting them to this day that would like to say differently.
Well, thank you. I don't actually mean it in a negative way when I say imposter syndrome, because every single artists are way better than I'll ever be, feel that way too, right? I think the reason that you feel imposter syndrome is just because you know where your influences are. But if you're a good enough artist, you hide it enough where people don't make that direct comparison, right? It's not like someone can look at it and go, "Oh, that came from blah blah blah." They just it just feels familiar, right? So it's not feeling outright. It's like, "Oh, I like the horns on that character. I wonder if it'll work on this character I'm working on." Like something inspired by it, something kind of familiar and similar, but it's not like it's exactly the same character or exactly the same part.
So now, if we hypothetically took a time machine and sent you back in time into the Toys for Bob studio and you met yourself back then, is there any advice or words of wisdoms that you give yourself?
Yeah, what's really funny? There's a really great talk by Neil Gaiman, commencement speech that he talks about. It's called, if you look it up on YouTube, it's something called like "Make Good Art." And in there, he was. It's I watch that video probably a couple times a year. It's just so inspirational. Just like recommend it, strongly recommend it to everyone listening to right now. Just go watch that video. But anyway, he said that one of the things that he talked about was when Sandman was getting popular and he got a lot of recognition. He was talking to Stephen King, and Stephen King told him that you should really enjoy this, and he felt like he didn't take that in well enough. He didn't really he should have absorbed and enjoyed that more. So I guess that would be my thing. I did hear that right when I was working on all this stuff. So I knew that and knew that I should really enjoy this moment. But I think in hindsight, I should have absorbed it more. I should have enjoyed it more. I was just thinking the other days, like, I didn't take enough pictures, right? Like of my team, like just everyday boring day stuff. I should have taken more pictures. I mean, I have some pictures of the prototypes and the toys and stuff like that, but like you know of my team. Like I'm really wishing that I had more of that kind of thing. Just really enjoying that moment.
I feel like that's actually really, really good advice.
Yeah, I think when you're doing something, when you're getting some levels of success, you should really take a moment to really, yeah, just to really enjoy it, right? Like to really, because all you do is freak out about all these new responsibilities and stuff when you're getting success. And so I think that's a great advice that unfortunately Neil Gaiman didn't take well enough, and I felt like I did at the time. I thought I was doing it, but now in hindsight it's like I should have enjoyed that more. I should have relaxed more.
Yeah, I feel that's really applicable to everyone in whatever state of their, wherever they are in life right now. Let's just take a breath and take it in and yeah, take pictures.
Yeah, everybody that's listening to this right now, go find that video called make great art, make good art, make great art, something like that. It's so inspirational.
Yeah, definitely bookmarking it.
Now, in the way of inspiration, what would you say is currently inspiring or influencing you in your current art? And what helps to keep you creative?
Let's see. Right now, so artists always work on certain things, right? Right now, I'm more concentrating on just honing my skills, I guess. Like if you see any of my Skylanders art, it's very sketchy, very basic, right? I felt like I need to work on my composition, my color, my rendering skills, like everything, right? So I've just been going back to kind of old school, you know, drawing a whole bunch of hands, drawing anatomy, drawing different things I find interesting. So I felt like the creativity part is something that's built in and it's always what I go to first, but that also means that I'm not working on the other stuff as much, right? Like it's been a long time since I've done studies of anything. And so for the past, I don't know, at least half a year, I've been getting back to sketching, like literally not on digital, not on the computer, just sketching on paper and drawing and doing studies of like I would draw tanks, motorcycles, whatever, just like actually doing studies and trying to hone my skills and trying to build a bigger and better visual library that I can just pull from, when I need to. So I've been working mostly on that kind of thing. I feel like creativity is something that comes to me fairly easily, and I think I can stop working on that for now and work on the other stuff, the skill parts.
Do you ever experience things like creative block or anything like that?
No, luckily, that's always been something. Been fortunate enough to not have that. When I feel like I have a block, so with artists, we get into zones, right? We call it the zone, where like things just happen naturally, and you're making all the right decisions, like naturally, and things fall into place. Different artists that I've talked to, friends and stuff, we get into deep conversations and discussions about this kind of thing, have different zones, right? Like some people have it for a short time in the day, and it takes a while to get into it, and some people can get into it pretty easily. I'm one of those people that can get into my zone pretty quickly and can stay in it for a long time. So I would say the first hour of my work, like when I start working, is all crap. Like it's not good. But after that, yeah, I'm pretty good for a while. So I think I haven't been in the block. I have been, in days where it's like, well, today I didn't do anything great. You know, I think I guess gems of something here and there that I can take it tomorrow and run with it in some other direction maybe, but nothing's great today. But I haven't been sat there and not knowing what to do or not having any ideas. My ideas is on paper. Like I think out loud on paper. I don't have things pre-pan planned pre-planned in my head like a lot of artists. It's all done in their head and they're just drawn. They just need to put it out. I'm the opposite. Everything happens on paper, so I think out loud when I'm drawing.
That's really fascinating, actually. I don't think I've ever heard of the concept of thinking out loud in that manner, but it makes a lot of sense, and it's just
Well,
fascinating.
well, you should try it sometime. Think out loud on paper, like just draw. But the reason I found out, I don't know if you guys know what I think it's called aphantasia. It's people that can't visualize anything in their head.
Oh yeah.
I
Right.
I have a bit of that, meaning from 0 to 10, 10 being like you can. Like if I told you here, picture a red apple on the table, and you close your eyes and you see a photograph. That's a 10, and 0 being I see nothing. I think I'm at maybe a 3, and most of my friends are artists. They're at like 8, 9, level that I've talked to about this. So the way my brain works is that I don't really have much in my head, so I have to draw it. Even if they're like really sketchy and badly drawn, at least I see it. So if you see some of my work, they're really sketchy and just really loose and quick. I draw it really, really freaking fast for that reason because I'm thinking as I'm doing it. Even when I'm visualizing in my head, like trying to visualize what Pop Fizz look like in my head right now, I'll have to draw it, like speed draw it in my head because I can't see the character.
That's really
That's
fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I've actually very recently learned a little bit about that condition and found out that that's actually why a lot of people don't like to read is because
Yeah,
they can't picture it in their head while they're reading the words. Whereas somebody like me, it's like I'm watching a video of what's going on in my head.
I am so jealous of you and friends that I've talked to about this. With yeah, like that is one of the big reasons I think that I don't like reading is because I have a hard time visualizing it and keeping it in my head.
And that makes so much sense because I've always wondered why people wouldn't want to read. Like it gets fascinating. There's just all these worlds inside these tiny little pages. And now I know. They can't see those worlds.
Yeah, I mean, I like books that have a lot of conversation. I think because that part you don't need visuals for. But yeah, when like a lot of the sci-fi stories, they you spent paragraph after paragraph describing something, and like I'm just listening to it, and I don't have it in my head. I'm trying, but like I said, I'm a level 3, right? You're seeing a photograph. I'm seeing like a fuzzy thing that doesn't really even stay there for a half a second. It's gone, and like it's a shadow of something. And then what I do, like I said, is I try to speed draw my way through it. So like if they're describing this castle, I'm actually drawing the castle in my head. I'm like if you picture a laser pointer moving super fast, drawing the thing. That's what I'm doing. So if I draw this castle and I draw the front gate and I'm drawing the top part where they're describing this, I don't see the gate anymore. Like because like I'm speed drawing. It's hard to explain. My brain works in a weird way, I guess, compared to other people. Um, so I can't see the whole thing. I can see parts of it that's been described, but like so watching movies is great because he's like, whoa, look at this beautiful thing.
My understanding of your like speed drawing is as you're speed drawing, what you've drawn previously is fading away as you go.
It fades almost instantly, but at least I have a memory of it as I'm drawing it for a
That's
short time. But
that is
it's
absolutely fascinating.
yeah, so it's like if a laser pointer has a trail, but it's not a long trail at all. It's very short.
Do you have any last thoughts or messages for the listeners today?
Well, just I'm glad there's a community of you wackos out there that are still enjoying Skylanders and still wanting to find out all about it, all these, a decade later. So thank you for being interested in our art, that we spend a lot of time and energy into. From a little bit of what I've said earlier, you kind of get a glimpse of how much work it is. It doesn't seem like it is, but when we first got into making toys, it just felt like, oh, that's easy. We can figure it out. But that's difficult. It's not easy. So the fact that you guys are appreciating the end result a decade later makes it very fulfilling. So just want to say thank you.
And thank you and everyone on your team who really just brought characters that into our worlds that we're holding in our hearts for 10 plus years,
You guys are crazy that you're still into this thing. So I'm glad that it's made such an impact on you guys, and I've been slowly kind of going through and I've dug out some old Skylander art and put it on ArtStation. But yeah, I've been meaning to just one of these days I'm gonna have to go through and just sort out everything and make some videos or something and kind of talk through some of the design choices for some of these characters and some early sketches, because I think there's enough of you guys out there that are hardcore and passionate about it that are eager and hungry for more info, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. That would be an incredible video series if you ever happen to get to that.
Yeah, I just need to find the time.
Yeah, hard to find that these days.
Yeah.
Now, I have one last question, kind of an aside at this point in the conversation, but one final question would be, do you think that production for the characters and the toys in Giants would have been easier if Giants had been a DLC expansion for Spyro's Adventure instead of a full-blown game of its own?
I'm not sure. I mean, to me, it's not. It's all the same. It's just time, right? You need time to make great art, and when time gets cut, then quality suffers, and that's the only thing that I care about. It was difficult to come up with a new idea, new characters, and all this stuff, and trying to figure out what a sequel is in the Skylanders world in that amount of time. So if you said, yeah, but what if it's a DLC for the first game, but you had 2 years? It was like, great. But if you say the same thing, but you also got 1 year, it's like, I don't care if it's a new game or not. It's still the same amount of work. So I know probably a lot of people felt like it should have been, a Skylanders 1.5, instead of 2. But to me, it really is just time. We kind of had to rush through a lot of things, and a lot of things, just because production is short, we had to make quick decisions that impacted other things, down the road that we, would have been better if we had a little bit more time.
Well, right on.
I feel like that pretty much wraps this up.
Great. Well, it was so good to talk to you guys, and yeah, thanks again for this opportunity. And I guess I'll probably talk to you guys in a couple of years when Trap Team comes around.
Probably. And you know what? Thank you again. It's always a pleasure for both us who get to talk to you and for our listeners who don't necessarily have the ability to do so, but they get the information through this show instead. Like, it's always a pleasure for all of us to hear the inside scoop on this franchise that we've loved for over a decade now.
Great.
And with that, we wave farewell to I-Wei Huang, who departs on his next adventure across the horizon. As we are waving goodbye, we see that Hugo is coming to us for our next excellent segment.
Noticing Hugo waving, we head over in his direction, taking note that although it is autumn at this point, Hugo's decked out in very heavy winter gear. And that seems kind of unusual because, well, it is starting to get a little cooler out. It's not that chilly yet. Although, it does feel a little cooler than normal. Almost as though there's a little bit of chill in the air. And as we note this, Hugo smirks, handing us his handbook, as we open to the page revealing today's Skylander, Chill. In today's segment of Hugo's handbook, we are going to be covering the Skylander Chill, who was introduced in Skylanders Giants. Chill is a humanoid Skylander of the water element, who is equipped with a large shield and what appears to be a double-sided ice dagger. Her moveset is rather interesting in that it ranges from, well, ranged to blatantly defensive techniques. And she was a brand new Skylander introduced in Skylanders Giants, but at the same time was also chosen for a light core in the very same game. Trioxen, why don't you go ahead and share your initial thoughts on Chill with us?
Well, Ditto, my initial thoughts with Chill is that she's not particularly one of my favorite Skylanders, but she does stand out to me from her pure unique moveset. Just because that combo, like you mentioned, of the range with defensive abilities, and then being able to, as she upgrades, manipulate her ice blocks into different ways across the playing field and everything. It's very unlike a lot of the other Skylander movesets that feel like sometimes, they lump together in categories fairly well, and then she just sort of stands out on her own. But there's just something about her that, I don't know what it is, maybe it's just my play style, and as unique as it is, it doesn't speak to me as it does others, because I know she is a very popular character still.
And I can completely see why. She is one of my go-to characters, especially in games prior to Imaginators, because she is that interesting and fun to use. Between throwing the ice javelins, depending on which path you take, those obviously have different added abilities. But between throwing the ice javelins and then creating defensive ice blocks to kind of use those to channel which ways the enemy are going to come at you, and then just turning around and throwing an ice block to add an additional ranged attack, it's a really, really interesting and fun playstyle. And then you just have, she shields. She just bumps that shield and blocks attacks that way as well on top of it. So she's a really fun character, in my opinion, to try to see how much you can get done without taking a single hit and without letting enemies get within a certain distance of you at all. It's almost as though she can neutralize any enemy that doesn't have ranged attacks without any kind of concern at all. And to me, between how interesting and complex it is and how fun it is to actually pull it off, that's put Chill way high up on my go-to list compared to some of the other characters that are just as popular.
No, and that's completely fair. And one of the things I will give her props for, too, from my perspective, is sort of as you mentioned, that she can enter any combat scenario, and there's a few different ways she can go about it. I feel like her moveset is a lot more customizable, for lack of a better term, of like how you're going to approach a single situation. I think more so than several other Skylanders, where there might be just one like through approach or one moveset that is stronger for a particular Skylander. Whereas Chill, I feel like, has a nice balanced array of options at her disposal.
I would agree with that completely. She has a very tactical moveset, is what I would say.
Tactical is a better word than customizable, for sure. Now, there's just one other thing about her moveset that kind of I question a little bit, is her theming for all her attacks makes sense. It's all ice-based. And don't get me wrong, I love narwhals and I love whales. It feels a bit odd to throw them into her Soul Gem and her Series 2 Wow Pow ability. I get that they are, they're animals that live in more Arctic regions. It just, when you don't have additional animals or something of that, like whales introduced earlier into her moveset, it just feels slightly out of place to me.
Right. It almost feels like that would have been more fitting to have added on to Zulu in the next game, and to give her something more purely ice themed for those abilities in this one. Because you're correct, the whale does feel just a little bit off.
Yeah, and like I wouldn't say I'm really being nitpicky here, if anything, because it still works. She's still fun to play as. It just sort of sometimes you get a thing out of left field, and it raises an eyebrow. But outside of that, it still can work with her overall theme.
Right, and I'm in agreement with you on that. Then there's a matter of her design. Like I said, she's got that shield, she's got that blade, but she's also got what appears to be like heavy metal plate armor for her wrists, for her lower legs, and for her chest plate and helmet. But then there also appears to be like scale mail-ish armor pieces that act as the connectors for those. So from chest plate to the bracers, and from the chest plate as well to the boots. And then she also, on her plate helm, has the ice-like designs, similar to what she has on her shield, but also a couple of wings. And I thought that was a really, really interesting armor design.
No, I'm 100% in agreement with you. She's got a healthy amount of textures throughout, like you said, with the plate mail and then her sort of chain mail armor, as well as the ice weaponry. Yeah, and then just the wings on her helmet, and as well as her pauldrons, that are those really spiky pauldrons. They still convey that ice aesthetic through and through in a way. They feel more like icicles or like spiky ice dragon wings jutting out in a way. It's an interesting, because it's not full. Her armor isn't hardcore ice, but it still conveys a feeling of ice.
It still conveys the harshness and the cold that is ice.
Yes, 100%, yeah.
That's definitely the vibe I get out of it. Now, all that being said, on a scale of 1 to 7, what would you rate Chill?
Well, Ditto, I think overall for me, Chill has a really great design. She has a really cool, unique moveset. But I think just the factor, and this is solely based on my play style and how I enjoy my games, as unique as her moveset is, it doesn't quite give me that little serotonin boost that you need. So I think I'm just going to give Chill a 5 out of 7.
Okay, that's a pretty reasonable score, actually. Now, for me, based on her moveset, based on her design, based on how fun a character she is to play, honestly, I would lean towards giving her a perfect score, except for that one thing, as you pointed out, which is the theming, where it's mostly flawless theming, except that one aspect where they added in the whale or the narwhal into her kit, and it just doesn't quite fit the theme. It doesn't quite feel right. Aside from that, she'd be a perfect score Skylander. 100% with how amazing her playstyle is. It really does mesh with my playstyle quite a lot, because I really do tend to take on a more tactical approach for a lot of what I do in Skylands. So her moveset meshes really well with me, but at the same time, like, her design is on point. It really gets the point across that she is an ice-themed character. She's a warrior who's not to be messed with. And I'd say she's probably one of the best characters that came out of Skylanders Giants, hands down. But with that one little flaw in the theming, I would have to deduct for that. And in that case, I would go ahead and give her a score of 6 out of 7. Which brings Chill to a final Hugo's Handbook score of 5.5 out of 7. And with that score marked down, Hugo closes the handbook, starts to undo his scarf as the chill starts to fade from the autumn air, and we hear a whistle from across the academy, where Flynn is desperately trying to get our attention. So it looks like we're needed over at the Dread Yacht to find out what's going on.
So as we cruise through Skylands on the Dread Yacht, Flynn puts the ship into autopilot and he comes over to us with a box full of hard hats and, surprisingly, earmuffs. It's a little confusing to say the least why we would need hard hats and earmuffs simultaneously, but then it dawns on us. As the sky gets darker and cloudier with some form of smog, and we hear the clanging of equipment and the loud revving of drills, we realize that our Dread Yacht destination is Drill X's big rig. We know the hard hats are for our safety, but the earmuffs are for the wrapping. So Drill X's big rig is a continuation of our celebration of Skylanders Giants, and the overall goal here was for Portal Masters and Skylanders to destroy Drill X, who is a big singing drill machine that Chaos is using to get to the lost city of Arcus. And to add another note, this level is very popular within the Skylanders community, probably more so for the song that the boss sings at the end of the stage. Personally, I don't understand the hype fully, but ditto. How do you feel about Drill X's big rig?
Oh boy. You sure opened a can here, Trioxen. My thoughts on Drill X's big rig are definitely quite contrary to the majority of the community. This level had a lot of potential. I can understand why it's so popular. It holds one of the musical bosses from the series. And while the rapping drill machine does have some novelty to it, and it's not the worst rap I've ever heard, it's really the rest of the stage and the mechanics included in it, or lack thereof, I should say, that really break this stage for me as opposed to making it. Drill X's big rig, as I've stated, had a lot of potential. You're exploring the rig, trying to get to and destroy Drill X to prevent Chaos from reaching the lost city of Arcus. Great story beat there, and this level is filled with conveyor belts that you must traverse, whether they're going in the direction you're intending or the opposite direction. You also do have several points where you have to worry about getting crushed. Standard stage hazards for a Skylanders level. But there's also a large number of points where jump pads are utilized, and these are even utilized in the boss fight itself. So one of the biggest issues I have with this level is that it clearly showcases how well platforming would have worked with Giants, as some levels we've discussed previously, such as Troll Home Security, have also done, and done a very good job of. But in this case, it showcases how platforming could have worked. There is no platforming, and it doesn't feel like this stage, unlike Troll Home Security, which felt like it wanted to be a platformer, but just wasn't, this stage doesn't feel like it wants to be a platformer. It feels like it's requiring platforming without actually providing the ability for platforming. And by making up for that, or attempting to at the least, by use of jump pads. Well, the theming for the level is great, and the actual trek through the level are pretty alright. It's really the forced platforming without the ability to platform that takes away from this level so much, in my opinion. Same thing during the boss fight. You have to use these jump pads to jump to dodge Drill X's attacks, whereas no other boss in the game has required anything close to this, because it's not a platformer game. There's always been an option of, you can run around in this pattern to avoid taking any damage at all whatsoever. Not this time. This time they require platforming techniques without giving you the ability to platform. So you have to carefully time jumps off of these very specifically placed jump pads. And it really just takes away from the excitement of it all. It takes away from any semblance of realism that was there. Not that there should have been much. This is Skylands, not the real world. But primarily what it does, at least from my experience, is it takes you out of the immersion. You're no longer immersed because this feels so very different than the magic that you normally get immersed in.
Yeah, that was very well put, and I do agree that the way that this level has been constructed with the jump pads throughout and making you wish that you had a jump button it does break the immersion quite a bit, and it feels more evident that it sort of takes the control away from you, the player, as you're exploring the big rig. I will also add that just the obstacles and the way that this level is constructed, it feels like it wants to punish players who choose slower Skylanders. So, in certain cases, Giants, being that this is a Giants game, you have these areas with the conveyor belts where they're pushing against you, so that immediately slows you down. And then you have the compactors and smashers coming down on you, that if you're a slower character, you're gonna get hit. Like, there's not really a good way to avoid getting hit unless you decide to pick a faster Skylander. And then there's certain parts of the level that seem to require a bit more patience and waiting than we've become accustomed to in the game at that point. Like, there is an elemental gate area where you're waiting for this one platform to turn around slowly so you can get on it and then get to another spot, and then wait for it to come around again so you can get back on it and get to the end of that elemental gate area. And it just, stuff like that, to me, slows the game right down. And when the game slows it right down, it just pulls me out, and some enjoyment is taken away in that moment. Some spark is taken away, if that makes any sense.
It makes plenty of sense to me.
And then, yeah, just to even go back to the point of jumping again, the boss battle with the jump pads where Drill X throws down his parts of his drill and you have to walk over to a jump pad to be able to jump over the resulting blast radius from that. That is probably the purest moment where it's like, I wish I had the control to jump over this, more so than having to rush over to the nearest jump pad. And even in certain cases, I wasn't even close to the jump pad and I would get hit. And I've lost a few Skylanders here. And I mean, you could say get good, but it just, having that lack of control as a player to be able to jump over that impact, it, as you said, it takes a bit of the magic away.
I will say that, once again, the boss's rap is not terrible. It's not the worst I've ever heard. In fact, I could see why some people would call it catchy. And once again, this is one of the very, very few musical bosses in the Skylanders series, which does make it completely understandable why so many people adore this level as much as they do. Unfortunately, we don't share that same adoration ourselves. That's not to say it's a bad level. It's just one that definitely affects our ability to remain immersed.
Yeah, I'm 100% on board with you. I do enjoy the music at the end. The score with the bit of like heavier rock elements to it is really fun, and it really does bring you into that fight. And I really love the scale of Drill X. I really love gigantic enemies facing off against you, comparatively a minuscule character. So, I mean, the highlight is the boss fight here, and I think maybe that's what most people enjoy from this level in the end. But that's my assumption.
Right, and I would say that's probably a fair assumption.
But as always, if anyone who's listening has, a different view on this level and would like to, tell us why they really love this level for all the reasons that they do, then feel free to let us know. So with Drill X put on mute for the time being and his big rig operation shut down, we hop aboard the Dread Yacht, give a little salute to Flynn, and he pilots us away out of the smog and back to Skylanders Academy.
As we approach the Academy aboard the Dread Yacht, we see Brock frantically waving us down, hoping to get our attention. It seems he's got a new creature for us to take a look at today. So we land nearby and go to join him in his throne area, where from behind the throne emerges a small troll-looking creature. A Derivator, to be exact. Today's Brock's baddie is the Derivator from Skylanders Giants, keeping in theme with the celebration of Skylanders Giants we've had going this episode. The Derivator is a troll enemy that is equipped with a rivet gun. Its primary attack is to fire hot rivets from that gun at the Skylander, although in close range it has been known to also set up landmines. Usually they're not found alone, they're found with other troll enemies, but even on their own, they pose a decent amount of threat. Trioxen, why don't we start with your thoughts on the Derivator?
To me, the Derivator is just a perfect little fit in with the troll family, at least within these first 2 games in the franchise, where you're introduced to trolls and what they're all about. They're into mechanics and building mechs and tanks, and they're very almost like construction mechanically inclined. And with having a blaster type, I mean, not to be confused with the blaster trolls, but having a blaster type who shoots not any other kind of ammunition, but specifically hot rivets at you. He's a perfect little fit as like an army building perspective. Derivators aren't the hardest enemy, and neither are they necessarily the easiest. They come with like 2 modes of attack where they can drop the mines and they can shoot you. So there's a different strategy to approach depending on how they interact with you. So they offer that level of uniqueness to help set them apart and make them more than just a variation of the blaster troll.
Now that you point it out, I am starting to notice a connection between the variety of trolls and their building materials. One of the first trolls we meet in this series uses a wrench as a weapon. So they do seem to be very much inclined towards more construction than anything else. I wonder how Chaos managed to turn them from that construction to destruction.
Yeah, lore-wise, that would be an interesting approach to look at.
I think it really would. Now, I will say my primary experience with the Derivators is in harder difficulties like Nightmare, where they are actively a major threat to the Skylander. Not only do those hot rivets do a massive amount of damage, but then they just drop a mine and run. So you have the hassle of having to chase them down afterwards, assuming you survived the mine to begin with. So, depending on the difficulty you're playing the game in, these can be really average enemies, or they can be really super difficult enemies. And it's just all up to how you want to deal with them as to how you're going to handle it. There's nothing really spectacular about them. They're just a troll enemy with the ability to shoot and lay mines.
Yeah.
But the theming being consistent across the troll classes, the theming of like construction and building and things like that, I would say it gives the Derivator a very solid theming overall that is complemented by the theming of the rest of the trolls.
Absolutely. If Skylanders were to ever have a miniature system, sort of like Warhammer, these guys would be excellent army builders or an excellent row in your little lineup of an army.
I completely agree with that. That being said, the overall overview of this enemy, it has more than one way to attack. Its design is simple and concise, and it's not really outstanding one way or another. It seems to be just a perfectly average enemy. That being said, how would you, Trioxen, score the Derivator on a scale of 1 to 7?
I am pretty partial to the underdog type characters. You know, necessarily Derivator isn't themselves an underdog, but they can easily be lost in the crowd of enemies that you would approach in any level.
I can 100% agree with that. The number of times that I've been playing in Nightmare difficulty and just trying to mow through trolls just to realize, oh, there's a mine. There was a Derivator in here as my Skylander is taken out. They've caught me by surprise a few times, so that's definitely a factor.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And as you mentioned earlier, just the thought of like when you're facing these enemies with or without other trolls or enemies nearby, you know, the approach of maybe you need to be playing a faster or a more ranged Skylander, such as Chill, or even Thumpback with his long reach of his anchor to be able to hit them before they can blast rivets at you or drop a mine at your feet. It offers an interesting way you can handle them in any given moment. Honestly, I feel like we've talked the Derivator up a little bit more, so the Derivator score has bumped up in my mind, and I am going to have to give them a 6.
Ooh, wow, that's an awful big score for an awful small enemy.
It is, but I think it's just the fact that they fit in really well with the troll enemies and they offer a little bit more dynamic play style. Yeah, I'm going to stick to my 6. I'm going to stick to my guns here.
Now, as for me, the Derivator is an enemy that can either be absolutely overlooked or can be the most annoying thing out there. I personally, based on design, based on how much I enjoy or lack thereof dealing with them, would say that the Derivator, on a scale of 1 to 7, in my mind, is a perfectly average 4. Which brings our Brock's Baddies rating of the Derivator to an actually surprising 5, which is just above average.
You know, I may have skewed it a little bit higher, but if we talk long enough about them, I'm going to love them more.
Right, and that's the whole thing. That's why we break down everything about them the way that we do, from their design to their moves, etc., is so that we can take a moment to actually appreciate enemies that we may not have really taken the time to even notice in the past. Brock also seems satisfied with our score, as he simply opens the gates to the arena and nods to us, indicating that we should go inside.
So as the gates open, we graciously accept Brock's offer for battle, and we walk into the stadium to a roaring crowd, and we approach our designated portals. We place our hands over our portals, ready to summon our chosen Skylanders. But Ditto, would you do me the honors of being the first to summon your Skylander?
Of course I would. And I hope you are ready for this. Brace yourself. As I thrust my hand out over the portal, focusing with all of my might, and before me the draconic shape of Spotlight takes form as she is summoned into the arena.
I cover my eyes. She's so bright. So much light.
Spotlight is a light element ranged Skylander with maximum health at level 20 of 690, critical hit 56, armor 31, speed 38, and luck 30. Her attack 1 is I-Beams, which rapidly fires concentrated beams of light at her enemies, dealing 47 points of damage per hit. Her attack 2 is called Halo Rings, which allow her to toss spinning rings forward, which will damage enemies and refract I-Beams. The direct damage from the rings themselves doing 55 points of damage per hit. And her attack 3 is Heavenly Aura, which creates an aura around her that damages enemies inside for 24 points of damage per hit. Her top path is called Visionary, which allows her to use her attack 1 on her attack 3, so shooting her I-Beams at the Heavenly Auras she places to increase the damage of the auras. Attack 2 throws out 2 Halo Rings at once, and it also increases the damage of attack 1 of those I-Beams. Her bottom path is known as the Ringer, and it causes her Halo Rings to become larger and do more damage. It also gives those same Halo Rings the ability to shoot out their own light beams, and smaller, lighter enemies nearby Halo Rings can get caught up in them and lifted by using the Heavenly Aura.
Luckily, I have been prepared for you to summon a very powerful Skylander, as it feels like that is the norm.
I mean, name for me one Skylander outside of Shroom Boom that isn't very powerful.
I mean, fair point. That is a good point. Everybody is powerful in their own way. Well, now that I finished adjusting my eyes to the sudden burst of sunshine that has entered the arena, I place my hand over the portal and call upon undead energies to revive Ghost Roaster into the stadium.
Ooh, that's a very unexpected move.
What can I say? You know, 'tis the season. We're getting into closer to the spooky time, so might as well call upon a ghost. Ghost Roaster is an undead Skylander. He is of a more melee moveset, and as far as his stats go, his health is 840, He has a critical hit of 58, armor of 33, speed of 40, and luck of 22. His moveset entails his chain whip, where he swings his chain tail at enemies, which deals 45 damage. His secondary is the skull charge, where he transforms into a ghostly head that barrels through enemies, cackling wildly and dealing 41 hit points of damage. His third attack is ectoplasm mode, which is a unique one, but when Ghost Roaster enters ectoplasm mode, he is immune to all attacks, but he does slowly lose health over time. This, of course, does 0 damage, though. Then for his top path, called Fear Eater, he gains the ability Phase Shift Burst, where all nearby enemies take damage when Ghost Roaster enters ectoplasm mode. He also will gain Ecto Friendly, where in ectoplasm mode he moves faster and will lose less health over time. And then his Nightmare Touch, where whenever he touches one of his ghosts, he creates a powerful explosion. And then for his bottom path, he gains the ability Fright Bite, where his Skull Charge will do more increased damage. His Unfinished Business upgrade will allow him to create a ghost when he defeats an enemy with his Skull Charge, and Life Transfer will actually heal him when he devours any of his ghosts while doing Skull Charge. And then, as an added little bonus, his Soul Gem ability, Lingering Curse, his ghosts will have a bigger range attack and will knock enemies away.
That's actually a pretty intimidating set, and I didn't think I'd have to bring this into the light, so to speak, but it seems like I may just need to point out that Spotlight does also have a Soul Gem that could be very useful here, which, when you shoot a Heavenly Aura with her I-beams, it creates light dragons who will attack enemies.
That is a nice little bit ability that Spotlight's got there.
Right, and I didn't think I'd need to pull it out here, but it's looking like I just might. My strategy for this particular match, I think I'd go with the top path, with Visionary, because it allows me to fire out 2 Halo rings at once, so I can refract more I-beams, and play a little bit more defensively, because the thing is, Ghost Roaster has more HP and outclasses me in every stat except luck. And my greatest advantage is going to be trying not to let him get close. It's going to be the fact that I'm ranged while he is melee. So the idea will be to keep him as far away from me as I can, though I also understand how unrealistic doing so absolutely is going to be, because he has that charge attack that basically allows him to dash at me. So my best bet here is going to be with the lightning fast I-beams, which are boosted by this path, and by refracting the I-beams off the Halo rings when he is actually at a distance from me, trying to keep him as such. I can also drop Heavenly Auras to use as traps to slow Ghost Roaster down, and then while I'm at it, just the quick press of a button, lightning fast shoot an I-beam at that Heavenly Aura as well to generate a Light Dragon that will act as a minion to go ahead and deal some damage while I'm at it. I think that's going to be the best bet I have at wiping out this undead menace before he has the opportunity to wipe me out.
I really think that's a good strat for Spotlight against Ghost Roaster. It's a lot of movement and a lot of placing of your attacks to try and catch me or catch Ghost Roaster in binds.
Definitely, especially since one of her upgrades is the one called Hello Halos, will allow for me to have more Halo rings active at a time. So I can fire 2 at once, but I can have a number of them out on the field.
So you'd be able to place your Halos around in certain ways and be able to catch Ghost Roaster in little binds or pinches and create pinch points, essentially.
Not just pinch points, but if one Halo refracts my I-beam to another Halo, if they're all angled fairly well, I can chain the I-beam through all of them, effectively trapping Ghost Roaster.
This is bringing me Prison Break flashbacks.
It's very, very similar to how Prison Break refracts his lasers.
Yeah, I definitely know how effective that can be. So that would be very interesting to have to try and deal with that, be on the receiving end of that.
Once again, just like we were talking about with Chill earlier, Spotlight here is a very tactical Skylander to use, and I definitely would play her in a style that is very much, yes, I want to be on the offensive with those ranged lasers, but at the same time, I am more than willing to sit there and basically set up traps and make sure that everything is just so there are pinch points, there are points you can't cross without taking heavy damage, etc. I would play this very defensively because I know if Ghost Roaster gets close and just starts swinging that tail, I'm in trouble.
Mm-hmm. And that's the kind of trouble that I would want to deal as Ghost Roaster in this fight. Because on my end, I think I would really want to... Well, I'm just going to say that this whole battle really excites me because this is a really kind of fun way Ghost Roaster can be played in a couple different ways to try and veer in and out. It feels like it'd be a very frenetic battle.
I could see this being very frantic, very intense, very high energy.
Mm-hmm.
And I honestly am not sure how it would end.
Yeah, because at least for my approach as Ghost Roaster, I've been debating, I think there's a good way to play either path, I think, here. But let's look at Fear Eater as the path where I'm focusing more on the ectoplasm mode. Because he doesn't take any damage outside of just being in ectoplasm mode, I feel like this would be a great opportunity to go for his full-on secondary charge to close the distance. Then ectoplasm mode, anytime that he's going to face damage or get caught in a situation where he would face a lot of damage, like from your halos. So let's say that Ghost Roaster charges towards Spotlight and then switches to ectoplasm mode, sending a shockwave after dealing damage with the charge. And then potentially while either Spotlight's recovering or is distracted or any other sort of thing, deals a few chain whips, then charges out of there, and then ectoplasms anytime that there might be an issue with any of the halos or any of the heavenly auras. This is sort of a hit and run situation, I think, for Ghost Roaster to try and go in fast, do a couple hits, back out, go invincible for a little while, and just rinse repeat.
And hope that those eye lasers in between your ectoplasm modes don't do too much, considering ectoplasm mode is going to be eating your health the entire time.
Mm-hmm. And now, the health that he does lose is lessened with his abilities, but it's bringing it down. So it's a bit of it's like almost resource management, really.
Right.
Then if we look the other way, we could also just go for the Skull Master, which is full on charging. Though the biggest boon for this path is that in the regular game, Ghost Roaster, whenever he defeats an enemy, he creates an additional ghost in this mode. And anytime he devours a ghost, he does regain health. The problem here being is a 1v1. And I don't know because we are not able to test this in reality, but with Spotlight's light dragons, can Ghost Roaster hypothetically defeat those, creating ghosts to devour them?
That's a very good question. One that we would find out the answer to once. Because if it does cause him to heal, then I would have to, in the moment, decide if it's worth it or not to continue to summon more of them as such.
Yeah, it completely on the fly would make you have to change your strategy if you were to start off that way.
Correct. If we found out that it does boost him. If not, I'd keep summoning them. Stick with the strat.
Oh, absolutely. Because now on Skullmaster path, Ghost Roaster doesn't have that benefit of moving faster and losing less health in his ectoplasm mode, or creating even a shockwave burst with it. So Ghost Roaster essentially becomes an easier target.
Right, and way easier to trap.
Absolutely.
This is a very interesting battle that literally, I have no way to call this. Because this is going to come down to how well it's played.
Absolutely. I feel like this will come down to just a mistimed button press on whoever's part, honestly.
Right.
Just because if we're both playing at the peak of our abilities, this is a battle that could go on for quite a while until someone just, I don't know, something slips. You never know. This stuff happens, right?
Something slips, you're in ectoplasm mode too long and you run out of health. I don't hit the button quickly enough in time to get the traps up, or I miss the timing on one of the rings and it only connects with half of them, or you mistime a jump into ectoplasm mode and I'm able to get an easy hit there. Even at the peak of our abilities, just a slightly split-second mistime could be the end of it for either of us.
Oh, 100%. It's kind of funny, but this honestly feels like we'd be both playing a version of Dark Souls with Skylanders at this rate. Almost a lot of dodging and rolling and...
Right, and you're not wrong. And I never thought I'd see Ghost Roaster as the kind of Skylander who would be more tactical, because based on his standard playstyle, he's not. He is very much a straightforward, highly offensive character. But put in a situation against an opponent with this kind of tactical ability, the fact that he does have the ability to turn around and still have something that he's able to do in order to possibly win actually says a lot about the character itself and how he was designed, because, well, he is seen as this straightforward, highly offensive character. The fact is, he can be used in a tactical manner instead. He does have tactical application.
Yeah, and it absolutely shines in PvP rather than in the standard Skylanders level, really.
Yeah, in the standard Skylanders level, you would put him in, obviously, charge and swing, charge and swing, charge and swing. That's pretty much how you're going to play him. You might go into ectoplasm mode in a boss fight, but that boss isn't going to pose the same threat level, not nearly as Spotlight does here. So you aren't required to think about it very much. Maybe a little, but not much. But then here, you have to come up with answers. And I feel like you've pointed out adequately ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, Spotlight offers that, as you mentioned, she offers that challenge that is just, she's a powerhouse of a character. All her variety of abilities, her ability to deal pretty much, it feels like damage at all times from any angle, especially that. Kind of one of those, you sit in the center and there's damage all around you. You're watching the world burn.
That was the general idea when I picked her, yeah. I could set it up if you threw a character at me like Chill, who has a shield, or like Chop Chop, who has a shield that'll fire stuff back at you. I'm now refracting that light beam off of a halo behind you and hitting you from behind where your shield does no good. I chose Spotlight based on her being the tactical character that can hit you at any time from any direction, and there's not really a whole lot you can say or do about it. And yet, Ghost Roaster has found a way.
Yeah, and honestly, going into this, I wasn't expecting Ghost Roaster to be offering that level of challenge even to Spotlight. I like Ghost Roaster. That's why I picked him, but I've mostly played him in a regular Skylanders level, so it's usually, yeah, as you mentioned, the charge and swing, charge and swing. But now having to see how he tries and deals with this and seeing all the tools at his disposal to handle such a challenge is quite exciting, honestly.
So it turns out PvP is really the mode that could make a Skylander shine. It's the easiest way to bring out their full potential. Shame we only got it through Swap Force.
Yeah, if only we got it further, but, this is why we have our little roleplay sessions here, right?
Yep, that's why the Arcane Arena exists.
So with bright flashes of lasers and bursts of light and the spine-chilling cackling of ghostly laughter permeating the arena, everything settles down. And what would you know? Surprisingly, it came down to another tie. Ain't that something, folks?
I never would have thought.
What started off as what felt like an easy win for our light dragon turned out to be a surprising challenge, and something surprising for everyone, I think, here. So I think it has to be said, good job, Ghost Roaster. You surprised all of us, and you've certainly earned it. So that about does it for our big, awesome 10-year anniversary celebration of Skylanders Giants and our 11-year anniversary of Skylanders Spyro's Adventure. It was awesome having I-Wei Huang with us, telling us more about the process of developing these games. And we had a lot of fun battling in the arena, exploring Skylands, and talking about some of our favorite Skylanders memories. So without further ado, Chill Bill, take us out of here.
That concludes this episode of Skylanders Portal Casters. You'll find the website and links to the hosts' individual channels in the description. Follow the Skylanders Portal Casters Twitter for regular updates about this podcast. And join Discord server for Skylanders discussion. Until next time, this is Chill Bill with K-Trolls signing off.
I actually just have to think about my score for this one for a sec. I'm a little conflicted.
You're not allowed to be conflicted. Not on this here podcast.
You have to be resolute.
Right.